As the Allies rampaged throughout occupied Europe after D-Day, there were thousands of German soldiers, members of the Wehrmacht and also the Waffen SS, who were captured and became prisoners of war. After they had surrendered, they were supposed to be protected by the POW status, but often they were not, and some were shot within minutes. The action of shooting captured German soldiers was not official Allied policy, but it happened because of a number of different circumstances relating to the brutality of the war, battlefield chaos, revenge and retaliation, and also the actions of criminal German units such as the SS. As the Second World War turned against the Germans, the true crimes of the SS were discovered, and with this, the Allies decided sometimes not taking prisoners may have been the right thing to do. By 1944, the Second World War had become exceptionally savage and brutal. Both Allied and German troops had suffered years of heavy casualties, atrocities and also fear. On the Eastern Front, atrocities committed by the Wehrmacht, the German army and the SS against civilians and Red Army troops created an atmosphere in which Soviet soldiers often killed prisoners and they didn't ask any questions. The Soviets were unlikely to ever face any reprisal for these shootings too, as Stalin and the Red Army generals would never punish the shooting of an enemy combatant even if they had surrendered. Also on the Western Front, American, British, Canadian and French forces were shocked by what they came across. Murdered civilians, massacred prisoners of war, and of course the concentration camps. Fighting in the Ardennes region during the Battle of the Bulge was also very horrifying. But the increasing brutalisation of the war made soldiers far more likely to shoot surrendering or captured soldiers, especially with their emotions running very high. But the worst treatment of all often fell upon those soldiers and members of the Waffen SS. These were members of Heinrich Himmler's paramilitary group. Originally the group started as Hitler's bodyguards, but a military wing, the Waffen SS, were responsible for many terrible atrocities, and ruthless commanders ordered the executions and killings of prisoners of war. For example, the Malmedy massacre in the Ardennes resulted in 84 American prisoners of war being shot by the side of a road. This event and the news of it spread quickly amongst the American units, and many would admit that after hearing about this, well, they stopped taking SS prisoners altogether. Also in Normandy, dozens of Canadian prisoners of war were shot too, and revenge was also in the air after this had been discovered. After these events, many Allied units informally adopted a policy of no prisoners when facing Waffen SS troops. With this, they would also shoot members of the German army, mistaking them for SS units and SS men, and would then obviously ask questions later. But combat on the Western Front, in the hedgerows and bocage of Normandy, or within the forests of the Ardennes, was chaotic and very close quarters. In this environment, some German soldiers tried to surrender at the last moment while still under heavy fire, and others pretended to surrender and then they opened fire. This led to Allied soldiers beginning to distrust late surrender attempts, and they then opened fire themselves. Confusion about who was actually surrendering led to a split-second decision in which prisoners were accidentally or were deliberately shot. Battlefield confusion became one of the most common causes that led to the deaths of prisoners of war on either side. Now by 1944 to 1945, Allied forces in Europe had been fighting for some time. Men who had lost close friends in front of them sometimes reacted violently when German soldiers attempted to surrender, believing they were, well, avenging their fallen friends. Also, the stress and trauma of combat often led to a breakdown in discipline in the heat of the moment. Many soldiers would claim that they simply snapped in the aftermath of a particularly bloody battle or skirmish. There were documented cases of German soldiers, especially fanatical SS troops, faking surrender before attacking. Some SS grenadiers surrendered and then detonated hidden grenades, and also last-ditch Werwolf units pretended to give up before then firing their own weapons. This led to some Allied troops viewing all sudden surrenders with immediate suspicion. Small Allied patrols and groups of soldiers often captured more prisoners than they could safely guard. If the front line was unstable in one section, or if reconnaissance indicated a larger German force, or that a counterattack was expected, soldiers became fearful that prisoners could pick up discarded weapons, overpower the guards, and then attack, but also reveal Allied positions. In a few cases, prisoners in dangerous forward positions were shot as a grim reality of not having the capacity to deal with the enemy. One example of this was in Normandy following D-Day. The Allies quickly needed to take the beaches and to move quickly inland, and many of the machine gun teams who had focused their fire upon the Allies surrendered. But with their hands up in the air, the advancing forces just shot and fired their weapons at the Germans. Some were taken to concealed areas where they were then shot. There was no time to take prisoners or then process them, so the enemy was just ruthlessly dealt with. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army soldiers behaved far more aggressively towards surrendering Germans. This was for a number of reasons. With the launching of Operation Barbarossa and the subsequent invasion of the Soviet Union, the Nazis committed scores of atrocities. The Einsatzgruppe death squads rampaged and shot millions of civilians, and the Soviets wanted revenge. Also for events such as the siege of Leningrad and the entire destruction of towns and villages, the Soviets refused to take prisoners at times. They shot SS personnel on sight, and regular Wehrmacht troops also suffered extremely harsh treatment, even if they had surrendered. As the Allies began to discover concentration camps, such as Buchenwald, Dachau, or Bergen-Belsen, they saw so many horrific sights that they lost all restraint. Inside Dachau, a number of guards were shot by the Allies after liberation, and many claimed they could not control their emotions after seeing what had happened. But some German units did also have reputations for fighting ferociously, and also for refusing to surrender. Hitler Youth divisions, for example, were known for this, and some Allied troops believed they would never surrender, and this suspicion led sometimes to shootings. Also, there was at times a lack of senior officers present at the front, especially during small engagements. Without officers nearby, then discipline occasionally collapsed, and this meant some of the crimes never went reported, and no one ever faced punishment for a shooting. In the final days and even after the conflict, some soldiers sought revenge on the German population, and they shot suspected soldiers and suspected members of the SS. While the Allies did not have a policy of killing prisoners, the extreme brutality of the war, especially the actions of the Waffen SS, as well as the chaos of the battlefields, and the psychological trauma of the war, led to unlawful and historically documented instances where captured German soldiers or prisoners of war were shot. These events were sometimes usually investigated, most went unreported, and those which did get reported were certainly unpunished because of the intensity of the Second World War, but technically, shooting a prisoner of war, regardless of what army they belonged to, was a war crime. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, maybe click subscribe. Thanks again for giving your time up to watch one of these videos.